Hello, children. In my previous chapter, that is second chapter of NCRT, we had discussed about the industrial reforms and IPR 1956, then foreign trade, etc. In this video, we will be discussing about chapter number 3 of NCRT, that is liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So you see that as you had read in class 10th also, that India follows the mixed economic system. Mixed economic system means that we had taken all the merits of the private, the capitalist economy and the socialistic economy. So we are following the mixed economic system right from the beginning, just after the independence. In 1991, India faced great economic crisis and related to the external debts, etc. The government did not have sufficient foreign exchange to pay the debts even. So we did not have too sufficient amount of the foreign exchange at that time. This financial crisis of Indian state that started from 1980s. We know that after independence, at the time of independence, we did not have the sufficient or good industrial base or agricultural base. Services sector also was not good. So to develop the Indian economy, to grow the Indian economy, the Indian government needed huge finance for it. And at that time, the main source of the finance to the government, the main source of revenue to the government is the taxation. When the expenditure is more than the revenue, this is the state of the deficit. That is the state of the deficit, budgetary deficit. You will be discussing, you will be studying in the government budget chapter. So at that time, the government had the financial crisis too much. The development policies, the Indian government had to develop the roads, railways, and industrial base, service sector, agriculture sector. All these needed the huge finance. There was widespread unemployment, poverty, population, etc. So to curb all these things, the Indian government needed the huge finance for that. And as I told you just now, that main source of government revenue is the taxation. The government could not impose much taxes on agriculture sector because agriculture sector was already at the stage of the stagnation. The government could not impose huge taxes on industrial units also because industrial sector was also not well developed. So there was only one remedy, that it had to depend on the foreign exchange, foreign loans. At that time, in 1980s, there was huge fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit, as I told, when the government's expenditure is more than government's revenue. At that time, fiscal deficit was estimated at 5.4% of GDP in 1981-82, which was increased to 8.4% of GDP in 1990-91. So there was huge increase in the fiscal deficit of the government. In 1980s, the government expenditure was more than revenue. The prices of essential goods were also rising very fast. And when the prices increase rapidly for a long time, this stage is called the stage of inflation. So the prices of essential goods were also rising very fast at that time. Prices of essential goods, this inflation rate was 16.7% before 1991, despite of the good monsoon, the three consecutive years, the prices of the food grains tend to rise very highly. So there was high inflation at that time. So India did not have sufficient amount money to run the basic necessities, to fulfill the basic necessities of the people even. There was huge fall in the stock of the foreign exchange also. In 1991, the foreign exchange reserve fell to the lowest level. You know that foreign exchange we need to pay for our imports, and so the country should have sufficient foreign exchange. This foreign exchange we we were running in short of the foreign exchange. We did not have sufficient foreign exchange to pay the values of the imports even for 15 days even. So we did not have the foreign exchange to pay the interests of the loan which we had taken from the World Bank, etc. So this was the position. Foreign exchange reserve was 8,151 crore in 1986-87, which declined to 6,252 crore in 1989-90. So this situation was very pitiable. Now what the government had to do? The government had to mortgage the country's gold reserve with the World Bank to discharge the foreign exchange debt, etc. Means whatever the gold reserve we had, that government had to mortgage that gold reserve to the World Bank to discharge the foreign debts. It received, so we had to mortgage the gold reserve. After that, to fulfill the requirement of the foreign exchange money, the Indian government reached to the World Bank, that was previously known as the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and IMF, that is the International Monetary Fund. We received $7 billion as loan to meet that crisis. But this loan of $7 billion, it was not given by the World Bank without any condition. They put the condition that the Indian government would have to remove the restrictions on the foreign trade, which earlier we had. And I told you in the previous chapter that India followed the policy of protecting the domestic industries by putting some import quotas, export quotas, and import tariffs, etc. So the World Bank, IMF, etc., they put the condition that we had to remove those restrictions on the foreign trade area. India had to agree with the World Bank to receive the loan, to take the loan, because we needed it badly. So the World Bank compelled us to follow the new economic policy in 1991 to provide us the loan of $7 billion. So India was compelled to follow the new economic policy, that is commonly known as the policy of LPG, that is policy of liberalization, privatization and globalization. In this policy, there were two phases mainly. That one group was the stabilization. The stabilization means that these measures, stabilization measures, are the short-term measures. These are related to recover the weaknesses of the balance of payment and to bring the inflation rate to the level. Another measure was Another measure was the structural reforms. These structural reforms are the long-term reforms, long-term measures. These were there to increase the efficiency of the economy by increasing the competitiveness, means to increase the quality, to improve the quality of the local producers, local products, so that they can face the competition with the foreign products being produced, and to remove the rigidity in various segments of the Indian economy. So in 1991, we followed the policy of LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization. In this video, we will be talking about the liberalization only. Liberalization, as you had studied earlier also, means to remove some restrictions on the government, on the enterprises which the government had put earlier. So, though the liberalization policy had been started in 1980s also in the field of industrial licensing, import, export policies, technology upgradation, financial, fiscal policies, etc. But in 1991, this policy of liberalization was followed strictly. It was followed, it can be studied under some headings. First may be the deregulation of industrial sector. As we know that after independence, Indian government had been following the policy of protecting the industrial units, the domestic industries. Several industrial licensing was there. That means every industry, every private entrepreneur had to take the license from the government in order to set up the industry, in order to expand the industry, or to close the industry even. Secondly, some industries were kept under the government only, and no private industrialist was allowed to run those industries. And thirdly, some products were reserved for the small scale enterprises in order to protect them from the competition of the large scale industries products. So, and fourth one, the control over the inflation, price inflation. It means the government used to put the prices, fix the prices of some products. But in 1991, the government, we had removed some restrictions. We removed the restrictions, the industrial licensing was abolished totally, and only the license was to be taken only for the production of the local alcohol, cigarettes, hazardous products, chemical explosive industries, electronics, aerospace, drugs, pharmaceutical, etc. But now, in 1991, many of the industries were freed from these restrictions, and now the restrictions were only for the industries which were producing the defense equipments, atomic energy generation, railways, etc. And in 1991, following the policy of liberalization, many of the products which were reserved for the small scale industries, they were also freed from their restriction, and other large scale industries were also allowed to produce those goods. Other industries were also led. So, along with that, as I told you just now, that there were many goods whose prices were to be fixed by the government only. Now, their prices were also let free. The prices were being fixed by the market forces, that is the demand and supply. Another thing was the financial structure reforms. Under the financial sector, the commercial banks, the investment banks, the stock exchange operations, foreign exchange market, comes. And all these were controlled by the RBI. RBI was the main controller. RBI is the main bank. And that is the apex bank which controls all the financial activities of these banks, financial sector. In India now, the bank, the Reserve Bank, it was reduced from the role to the role of regulator, from the regulator to the facilitator of the financial sector. This was the RBI was changed from a regulator to the facilitator. It means it was reduced to the role of the facilitator. That is, the financial sector may be allowed to take the decisions of many matters without consulting the RBI now. Earlier, prior to 1991, prior to new economic policy, the RBI had sole powers to control the financial sector. But now, instead of being the regulator, it became the facilitator. Now the RBI, many of the financial sectors, they did not have to take the permission of RBI in many matters. What are these measures? These are first to establishment of the private sector banks. Now many of the banks, they did not have to take the permission from the Central Reserve Bank. And the foreign investment limit of the banks was raised to 50%. Those banks which fulfill the certain conditions, they could establish their banks, they could establish their branches. Of course, not fully liberated. They have to work under the RBI. But if they fulfill certain conditions, they can set up their branches. They can take some decisions regarding the fixing of the investment rate, etc. of their own. So these were the conditions of the financial sector reforms. Then regarding the tax reforms. Tax reforms, these are related to the taxation policies of the government and regarding the public expenditure policies. There are two types of taxes, direct taxes and indirect taxes. Direct taxes are those taxes which the taxpayers, they pay to the government and they know that they are paying the government. The taxpayer knows that he is paying the tax to the government. Moreover, they cannot shift their liability of paying the tax to any other person. So regarding in 1991, there has been continuous reduction in the taxes of the individual incomes. It was felt that high rate of income tax, it leads to the tax evasion. Tax evasion means tax chori karna. If we impose heavy taxes on the income tax, then the people, they try to evade the tax. वो टैक्स की चोरी करने की कोशिश करते हैं. So in this, to avoid this, the government is continuously trying to reduce the income tax. Regarding the corporation tax also, which is imposed on the producers, this tax is also being reduced to some extent. The government is trying to reduce the indirect tax also. Then regarding the indirect taxes are the taxes whose burden cannot be shifted to any other person. These are put on the essential commodities, on the commodities we purchase, like sale tax or entertainment tax, etc. These taxes were also being tried to make simplified. So these are all for the tax reforms. Next is the foreign exchange reforms. Foreign exchange reforms in 1991 was taken that immediate measures were taken to solve the problem of deficit of the foreign exchange. For this, the value of the rupee was devaluated. It led to increase in the inflow of the foreign exchange. वैल्यू रुपए की वैल्यू को कम कर दिया गया, जिसकी वजह से फॉरेन एक्सचेंज का इनफ्लो इंडिया में बढ़ गया. नाउ द मार्केट्स वर freed to fix the rate of foreign exchange. Means there was not managed rate of fixing the foreign exchange rate. Now the rate of foreign exchange was freed to be fixed by the any government authority, that is RBI, etc., or financial. Then it was freed to be fixed by the demand and supply of the foreign exchange. Another is the trade and investment policies. Liberation was given on the trade and investment policies. The aim was to promote the efficiency of the local industries and to adopt the modern technology. Earlier, we were following the quantitative measures, we were following the tariffs, we were following the import quota, export quota, etc. These were also removed to some extent. The quantitative restrictions on import and exports were removed, and the tariff rates were removed, and the removal of licensing procedure of the imports were also removed. Export duties were also removed to increase the competitive position of the country. So in this way, the in 1991 the government started a new economic policy, and in this video we have discussed about the liberalization. In next video I will explain you about the privatization, etc., which the government took the efforts to privatize the industries. Till then, goodbye.